I'm going to say it. Things are about to get fishy. Because we're going to a goldfish pond. This is poirotpals' Murder of Roger Ackroyd, The Gift That Keeps Giving. We're on chapter 9. When we were planning this episode, we were having this dilemma, and I would rather just talk about it than try to balance it quietly on our own. There's a lot that happens ahead. And in one way, it's important because it's the plot. But as you had said, in another way, none of it matters.
I'm going to use a term now that I have maybe used once in my life before, but I'm going to say it as if I use it all the time. But Caitlin, I kind of think to go through every little plot point that is a red herring is, it's kind of a fool's errand. And
yeah.
And it does feel, so that was the term that I never used, but it popped into my mind. Did it sound like I use it all the time?
It did. Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah. But also I don't want to be a fool.
No, and I hate herons, so this is perfect.
One of the most formative moments I had in elementary school was when this kid, who now is very good friends with a couple of my best friends, he turned to me and he was like, "You are a fool."
What?
I was like, I know. And I was like, oh my God, wow, I need to reevaluate my life. I had never spoke to this kid before. It could have been anyone next to him. I just think he really wanted to say that to someone. But I was that person, and that has shaped my entire life.
I can totally understand that, because first of all, who uses that word at that age?
He must have heard it somewhere.
It must have been that. And and obviously you're not a fool.
Thank you.
I would definitely say that if that had happened to me, I would also be like, I don't want to hear that word.
I don't remember a lot about elementary school, but I certainly remember that. But we do want to have another F word, which is fun, I guess. So we're just really trying to balance some things out here.
In the previous episodes, I'd written skeletal synopses of these. I've gone a little bit further.
Whoa.
With them. So tell me, and be honest, Caitlin, just tell me, Chad, yay or nay? Just okay. Definitely. No, Chad, I don't like it.
Rethink the choice that you made, Chad.
Rethink. Chad, you're a fool.
Okay. You're a fool. You are a fool. Okay, I'm so excited. Tell us what the goldfish pond is about.
Chapter 9, Caitlin, the goldfish pond. Dr. Shepard and Poirot have a walk around the Fernley estate and eavesdrop on Flora and Blunt. Flora is thrilled that her uncle left her 20,000 pounds in his will. Flora and Blunt continue their flirty conversation. Then Poirot makes his presence known. Flora recalls that the dagger was missing from the curio cage before dinner. Poirot fishes a gold ring from the goldfish pond. It's a women's wedding ring. There is an inscription on it. From R, March 13th.
Ooh, I think that was great. I'm going to say yay.
You're going to say yay? Okay.
Oh my God. You know what? I was like, wow, I'm having the craziest sense of deja vu right now. You know why? Because we've recorded this episode before.
Yeah, this is the second time for us.
Yeah, we had some sound issues.
Yeah.
Whew, okay. Yeah, I was just like, wow, you have these powerful senses of deja vu in your life sometimes. But we're also, in terms of being somewhere that we've been before, I have to say this is another magical wilderness moment.
Yes, absolutely.
In a book. I might harp on it. I just talked about it in the Halloween episode. There is something about nature and her characters. It's never like a group. It's always one or two people having a meeting or overseeing something. And the woods are these potent times where she does make a ton of references to mythology. I don't know if she's intentionally doing it or like the woods like draws this out of her. But this is our moment to be in the trees.
Yep. To be amongst the creatures.
Yeah. And to have revelations. So things we want to like slow down with. And I bring this up because this is one of the first times I feel like where Poirot is like, wait, what did you say? To Shepherd. This is the first time that Poirot is like, well, hey, who gets all of Ackroyd's money? Like, this is really important. And Shepherd kind of says as an aside, he's like, oh my God, I should have thought of that. We can interpret that a couple ways. He's like an innocent investigator, or he's trying to frame his friend. And he's like, wow, I could have really used that when I was like making the case against Ralph. Right. And so Poirot is like, why hadn't you thought about that before? Poirot starts to really question him. And then he says, even if you told me what you meant by that, I know you wouldn't be telling me the truth.
What happens there is that, as you said, we're meant to believe that when Poirot says, even if you were to tell me something I don't believe it would be the truth, that's how defensive of Ralph Dr. Shepherd is.
Yes. Yeah. Thanks for putting that in perspective.
But then we have the great thing that we learned just throughout these chapters, which was that Poirot doesn't think Ralph did it. Mm-mm. And where does that leave Dr. Shepherd? So, yeah.
And that becomes clearer and clearer and clearer. And Shepherd, to kind of retort that, he's like, everyone has something to hide, which is kind of like a mystery cliche. Mm-hmm. Christie is baiting us or encouraging us to remember that Shepherd, he knows a lot about murder mysteries, and he like kind of brags at sometimes about his knowledge of it. So he like responds with this cliche, which then Poirot is going to actually accuse everyone pretty soon of everybody having something to hide. And that is kind of the nonsense of the next couple of chapters, is winding us up with all of this subterfuge, then deflating it all, and us realizing like, oh, none of this matters. Which, as I reflect on it for like the millionth time we've talked about this, part of me does feel a little betrayed by that. Like, I wish that it mattered more. But she's also like doing so many brilliant things that I can't be like, I really wish that you had like made these choices, because that doesn't even matter. The big reveal is like, that's what's going to shock readers around the world. It's almost like, yeah, don't worry about this over here. But I do wish that this was going somewhere. Some of it is just, as we said, it's fun. You can like luxuriate in all of her witticisms and the ways that she weaves in all these hints. So in some ways it's like a fun dance, you know, before you get to the like main act, I guess, or something like that. Also, this is where Poirot warns Shepherd. He says it's not easy to hide things from Hercule Poirot. He has a knack of finding out. This is a turning point in the novel. And I actually think structurally this chapter does matter because of that. Mm-hmm. Because so far, Shepherd is the constructor. He's the one who's like creating the illusions. He's the one that is doing the obscuring. And now Poirot is the one who is crafting all the subterfuge. And like the way I could think about it, it's like Punked for Murderers.
Right.
He's crafting all these moments, or he's looking to see how Shepherd reacts. And he's luring Shepherd in by being like, would you please do this for me? Would you please be the Hastings to my Poirot?
This is really the perfect example of this. First time you read this book, when you finish the line, but it is not easy to hide things from Hercule Poirot. He has a knack of finding out. You're like, yes, he does, because we've read the other books, we've read some of the short stories, and he absolutely has a knack of finding out. That's why we're reading the book. Way to go. And the second time you read it, you're like, oh, he did find out. And he's like, oh, this is so interesting. But now when we're talking about it, the other layer is that if you've read this thing enough or are just smarter than I am and picked it up more quickly, is that Shepherd doesn't realize what Poirot is saying that, and that Poirot is starting to become suspicious of him at the time of writing this particular part of the book.
And it's interesting because then there's this other layer. And I do think there is a warning in Poirot's words, but it's more like, I know that you're hiding him. You know, we get this, again, sense that Shepherd is this great protector.
Right. So
we can read it that way too. Whew. Okay. So one of the first little experiments he does is he's like, oh, Shepherd, let's go on a walk. Let's go into the woods. Let's go to this goldfish pond. And they like sit on a bench for a moment, and it can be seen as very charming. And again, like we have all these wonderful cozy thoughts of Poirot and Hastings. Like Poirot will like sit on Hastings' bed and they'll talk about, what are your theories? I think I know where we're going in this pattern. But also, this is a really interesting moment if we do look at it in a more sinister way. I wonder if there's this lure too, speaking of like fishing for knowledge. I wonder if he's like, is Shepherd going to try to kill me?
Yeah.
I wonder if there is, again, to do like the fish bait thing, but like, I wonder if he's also like baiting him. How committed is this man to his subterfuge? Let me put myself in a bit of a vulnerable position and just see what he does.
Let's just say that the book is very, very different, and Shepherd kills Poirot as they're walking past the goldfish pond. He's going to be caught, right?
Yeah.
Poirot does not put himself in a lot of situations where he and Shepherd are alone in a room together.
Yeah, that's very true.
They're always with somebody else.
Yeah, like safety in numbers. There is this scene, and I don't want to give too much away, where they are alone again. And it is a little scary. Like I do, even though I'm like, I know there are 1 million more Poirot books, but like I did get a little nervous for him. I was like, are you okay? Like you are alone with this murderer and like the mask is off. But he says, I trust your intelligence. You are smart enough to know that killing me is a really bad idea. And I do wonder if we get like a hint of that here. All of this is subtext, like none of this is written in the scene. But you have to, I don't know, yeah, you have to wonder like what the dynamic really is and where the choices come from. Let's get to something a little bit more peppy. We have Flora, and she is just like skipping.
Is Flora in what you would call mourning clothes?
Yeah, I think at that time you're just supposed to like wear black. And we get this really awkward flirtation that you had mentioned in your summary. She calls him Methuselah, which is a biblical reference to a man who lived to be 969 years old. So she's like, you're really handsome, but you're actually super old too.
Yeah, that's like centuries older than a silver fox, you know?
Yeah, like you're next level. Then the only thing that's odd, kind of like out of this flirtation too, and it's interesting, he like mixes it up. Blunt thinks she's talking about Faust, and he says some of us would sell our soul to the devil if we could. So he's truly just bumbling, but we can take that as, oh, should we be suspicious of him? This is where it kind of is this, like, I almost think of it as like machine gun suspicions, and we get that a lot, where like everybody just looks sketchy, but we know that Dr. Shepherd did kind of sell his soul and his morality for a ton of money. I did just want to mention that she always describes Blunt as looking off into the distance because he's like a hunter. So it's like he's shy. He doesn't want to talk directly to Flora because he's scared of women or hates women. Yeah, they said he hates women. Not much has changed today. There are plenty of Blunts in the world.
Can you imagine? Let's just for 1 second, if I can.
You can.
Let's put you and I where Poirot and Dr. Shepherd are. The co-hosts of poirotpals walking around the Fernley estate. Could you imagine seeing Flora all giddy and happy, but dressed in black? And then we hear references to Methuselah and Faust. What is going on?
It's also kind of like a weird, like, goth zone.
Yes.
Where everyone is like really dark, actually. Everybody lets their goth flags fly in the forest. It's weird. It's one of my favorite chapters of the book, to be honest.
Absolutely.
We learn that Flora's really happy despite the murder because she makes a lot of money. We learn that she's inherits 20,000 pounds from her uncle, and we have that totaling
$356,000, like the equivalent of 300,000 pounds. So if that is even a slightly conservative estimate, no wonder she's so giddy.
If somebody was like, Caitlin, I am going to give you $300,000, I'd be like, wow, that solves a lot of problems.
My first thing would be, I'm going to go flirt with a hunter by the goldfish pond. I would be like, that's what I'm doing.
Well, she feels so free.
Yep.
She's like, I can make all the biblical references I want. Oh, Blunt notices something in the pond, and Flora references Melisandre, which is a Debussy opera. It's also super goth. It's sad. There's a wedding ring in a pond. Both of the main, like, love protagonists die in the end. So it's super dark.
Yeah, it's a very interesting conversation that we don't have any precedent for in this book.
No.
And also, afterwards, we don't get this either.
It really gives me Halloween party vibes because we're in the forest, because we have all this stuff. And I think that's just part of maybe her style that we'll learn about. And I don't want to harp on it, but it's weird that we get so much. Then, right after that awkward cultural reference, Poirot's like, this is the time we make ourselves known.
Yes.
I wonder if he's like, this flirtation must stop.
Right. I can handle no more of this.
Yeah. Or just like, it's going to be so much more awkward the more we put this off. Like, we've got to make ourselves known. And really, we get this exchange. Like, Poirot's like, oh, let me ask you some questions because I'm Poiroting. And really, the most important thing we get is that the night of the murder, Blunt is convinced that he heard Raymond, the secretary, who's also suspiciously happy. He was like, I heard them having a conversation like before the murder, and he said it was really ordinary and sounding unimportant. We know that that was from the dictaphone. And so it was a really ordinary, important conversation. It just wasn't Raymond. It was a recording of Raymond. Poirot talks about the chair. And yeah, you had mentioned the knife. Do you want to go over like why the knife is important?
Flora and Dr. Shepard get into a bit of a disagreement about the fact that Flora absolutely recalls the dagger missing from the curio before dinner. It's like, okay, so he took it early.
Yeah, there's some weird back and forth there, and we can see Poirot like, what's up with this? And again, maybe it's all under the guise of protecting Ralph. Poirot does something very odd here. He also sees the gold glinting thing. He gets very dirty. He gets mud on his shirt. And so we know that it's somewhat important enough for him to like encounter and deal with mud. And he's like, oh, I didn't get it. And so they're like, okay, let's go back to the house. And Poirot's like, hey, Shepard, I totally did find something. And Poirot says that sometimes lying is really important. Again, we can read it so many ways. I think he's kind of like, I am about to lie to you a ton. And as you had said, it's a gold ring that says from R. And so we have like, okay, is it Raymond? Is it Ralph? Who is this from R? And who's in love with who?
Couple of things about that. There's always been this kind of what was Poirot before he was a detective on the Belgian force. So with this sleight of hand, maybe he was a magician.
I like that theory.
Secondly, we have a gold ring found in a goldfish pond, which is...
Wow, it's a lot of gold.
That's a lot of gold. The other thing too, and maybe people are aware of this, but I just think that this kind of lends a certain type of ugliness behind something potentially beautiful, is that goldfish are bottom feeders. They're carp. They just eat all the crap on the bottom of the pond.
It's a little sinister.
It's not like a porpoise pond where these beautiful mammals are.
I want to go to a porpoise pond, but we must leave this magical oasis. We go back to Fernley and we get to chapter 10, the parlor maid.
Chapter 10, the parlor maid. Poirot finds out the details of Roger Ackroyd's will. He then enlists Dr. Shepard to help get information about Mrs. Ferrers from Blunt. When checking an old box in Roger Ackroyd's room, where he had a habit of keeping cash, Mr. Hammond, the lawyer, states that 40 pounds is missing. A parlor maid, Ursula Bourne, is immediately suspected, as she had been recently scolded by Roger. Poirot asks Dr. Shepard to follow up on Ursula Bourne's reference letter by speaking with her former employer, who lives 13 miles away.
Okay, so perfect. Yay again.
No nays so far. No nays. This is great.
But who knows? It could always happen. The chapter opens with Mrs. Ackroyd. So remember, that's his sister-in-law. She's like super dramatic. She's like super upset. And I feel like maybe Agatha Christie had some people in mind to make fun of. A lot of the people in her stories end up being these caricatures. And I guess maybe that's some of the fun of this for her too, is she's like, let me just make fun of certain types. She's the overly dramatic woman. Blunt is the weird, awkward hunter dude who like longs for the colonial days. I just think that people of the time reading this are like charmed. They're in for the ride too of making fun of British types,
right,
or societal types. And so she's fun because she's like, I think that Ackroyd accidentally killed himself because he loved to handle queer curios, like weird objects from his travels. She's like, maybe he slipped. It's so dumb. Obviously, he didn't slip and fall and stab himself in the back while sitting down.
Back first? Yeah. Right. Oops,
yeah.
Oh, Jesus.
She puts these people in here to like do a fun thing, but also to maybe like push the plot forward.
Oh my God. So I just recently rewatched the Venice movie.
Yeah.
And how does the doctor kill himself in that? He backs into...
Oh, yeah. A sword.
That's interesting.
He did kill himself with a curio.
That feels very intentional to me.
Yeah. Kenny B, you got one on us. 1 point for you. So she makes this ridiculous claim. And everybody is awkward and embarrassed. And there's this weird silence because they're like, oh my God, what is she doing? This woman is all over the place. And so Poirot's like, I need to talk to Hammond. I need to really figure out like about the inheritance thing. And so he kind of like goes over and is like, let's go to this room to talk. And Shepherd does this. He makes a weird choice here. Shepherd decides to follow Poirot. And Poirot, I can imagine him looking around and be like, oh God, you're here.
Right.
And Shepherd is like, oh my God, like, am I intruding? Am I being really weird? So he kind of does the thing of he's calling it out again. He's like, oh, I'm so embarrassed. I was just so curious. I've been following you around. And Poirot's like, no, it's okay. But it really is, I think, a sign for Poirot. He's like, this guy is stuck at my hip. He's like a Velcro dog. Like, he's just like, wherever you go, I go. And so he's like, you know what? You are so committed to this case, Shepherd. Would you please get some information for me? Would you go talk to Blunt and drop Mrs. Ferrars into the conversation?
Sometimes when I read books, I see them as if I'm watching a film.
Oh, yeah.
And this is so fascinating because Dr. Shepherd is the camera.
Yeah.
And he's going to all these places and doing all these things. And that's how we're learning about them happening. But this time the camera follows Poirot and Poirot turns and goes, what are you following? I can see it in my brain. Uh-huh. But it's a striking thing to be jolted back into the perspective that we're getting as readers.
He never does that with Hastings, you know?
No. Hastings would be hanging out with Flora, no doubt.
Yeah, he'd be like, I'm in love with all the women in this room.
Exactly.
And we kind of learned that Blunt has recently lost a lot of money. And Shepherd, though, makes a really interesting comment because he's supposed to ask about the Ferrars. And he's like, Mr. Ferrars was only a man with more money than was good for him.
Yeah.
So Shepherd is like, I'm reporting back to you, Poirot. And I emphatically insist that Blunt is innocent. And so Poirot's like, okay. I wonder if it's that thing I think about from Lynx when Hastings realizes that he's implicated an innocent person. And it's his oh no moment, and then he has to go solve this big problem that he's created. I wonder if that emphaticness, he's like, we're two dudes. I don't want to get you in trouble. I wonder if there's a little bit of that in his insistence that he's innocent.
We both kill large mammals, as it turns out.
Oh my God. Man is the most interesting prey, or whatever that is. Mr. Hammond, it's such a cute little thing. He's like, oh, does everybody in the family have enough money right now? You know, I know you can't withdraw anything and his assets probably aren't unfrozen yet. Are we all good? I kind of like Mr. Hammond.
Yeah, me too.
And Raymond is like, you know what? Ackroyd used to keep some cash in a drawer by his bed. Let's get it, and then we can dole it out to make sure everybody has enough money. It's that kind of old-fashioned patriarch is the provider. And if the provider stops, then everybody's like, my life can't go on. I have no job.
Also, quickly, in your bedroom, Caitlin, which drawer do you keep your box full of money?
You know what? I wish I had a box full of money. No, if I say I'll start, that is inviting people to break into my house.
Exactly.
There's no money in my house. Go somewhere else. How about you?
I always keep $2,000 just right next to me at all times at bed. All the time.
Just like under your pillow.
Yep.
It's of another time. It's of another place. So basically we learned, oh no, some money is missing. It could be Parker. It could be one of the staff. We ask Mrs. Russell about it, and we learned that the parlor maid, Ursula Bourne, is leaving tomorrow. So like, what's up with that? And we learned that she and Ackroyd had an argument where she had quote unquote disarranged his papers. And they're like, did you steal the money? And she's like, I don't know what you're talking about. But basically the suspicion is on Ursula.
Right. And obviously she argued with him when he was alive. So Did she then kill him? Who knows? And
then it's interesting because Poirot's like, yeah, like she doesn't have a good alibi, but I just don't see a motive. And then we get this quote. Dr. Shepherd observes, he looked at me very hard, so hard I felt uncomfortable. Ugh. So that gives me chills. Even though he says that, he's like, Dr. Shepherd, it's this town called Marby, or maybe that's the estate. He's like, talk to the people who recommended her.
Well, Caitlin, that's going to bring us to chapter 1-1, or some people call it 11.
Some people.
Dr. Shepherd interviews Mrs. Folliot about employing Ursula Bourne. Mrs. Folliot becomes agitated, and Dr. Shepherd leaves without gaining much information. Poirot, in the meantime, has tea with Caroline, Dr. Shepherd's sister. He tells her some of the details of previous cases, and Caroline gives him information on the Ackroyd case.
Yay, again. I think you've passed the test and you don't have to take tests anymore. You're good.
I like tests, Caitlin.
Okay, I can put the pressure back on. I can turn it up.
Please. Yep.
I think that the thing that's so interesting here is we start to see him get really uncomfortable with the pairing of Poirot and Caroline. And he's like, you're telling him too much. And again, we can read it as like, oh, he's trying to protect Ralph. That's always what we can fall back on. But we know that he's like, what are you two saying?
Have you ever been in a situation, Caitlin, where you have a friend, you're going out and you're doing something, and like say you're at the mall, because we spend so much time in malls.
So much time in malls.
And you're hanging out with your friend at the mall, and then you see another friend at the mall, and you're like, hey, this is so great, da-da-da-da-da, but hi, blah, 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 blah. And then, your other friend goes away and you and your friend go out, see a movie, have dinner, whatever. But then let's say 3 weeks later, you're talking to your friend you went to the mall with, and she says, oh yeah, by the way, I started hanging out with that other person without you. That's how I felt with Shepherd. There was part of it too. Obviously he's freaking out because of what he did, but there is also this but I thought I was Poirot's buddy.
Yeah. Solo buddy.
Right. We're the ones that go to the mall together. Oh, okay. But you're going to the mall with my sister too? Oh.
Ugh. That is so high school. I remember that feeling of oh, I guess you all can exist without me.
That's it. That's the feeling. Right.
Yeah.
And later in life, you're like, oh, this is fantastic. I don't need to be here. But then it's oh, Jesus.
People can have multiple friendships and it's really fulfilling. But yeah, then you're like, no, when I'm not there, everybody turns off. Okay. So yeah, it's a pretty simple chapter. We get more questions about the weird conversation Shepherd had with Mrs. Russell. This, to me, is one of the silliest parts of the story because it just adds so much complication Mrs. Russell has her own motives for the weird conversation they had at the beginning of the story. But this, again, it's like questions, questions, questions. What's up with this? How does the Mrs. Russell thing fit into everything? It obscures and obscures. And that's it. That's chapter 11. Chapter 1-1.
This was before you and I knew each other. But didn't you have a podcast called Questions, Questions, Questions?
Yes.
Okay.
I
thought so.
You can find that deep in the dark internet.
Really? It's on the dark web. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll check that out.
People didn't like it.
I'm guessing it was because it was too good.
I asked too many questions.
But that's the title of the podcast. Oh,
I know.
That must have been so frustrating.
It was just really over everyone's head. Anyways.
Okay. Are we going to do it? We're going to do chapter 12?
I think, we're at round the table. And I think that before I called it the round table as if Poirot were in King Arthur.
Yeah.
But it's round the table. We all sit round the table. So tell us what happens.
Chapter 12, Round the Table. After the coroner holds the inquest, Inspector Raglan tells Poirot and Dr. Shepherd that Ralph is the subject of a nationwide manhunt. He also mentions that the phone call to Dr. Shepherd originated from the railway station 3 minutes before the departure of an express train to Liverpool. Later, Poirot calls a meeting at Fernley that includes Mrs. Ackroyd, Flora, Blunt, Raymond, and Dr. Shepherd.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Chapter begins with the inquest. We haven't had a lot of inquest moments, and we really don't get any here. But I think it's great that Shepherd testifies about the method of the crime and the timing of the death, which I think is great because he is the expert. Then, we get this lovely Poirot moment when Raglan is like, Liverpool, and he's giving all that information. Poirot is like, I think it has nothing to do with Liverpool. I think that the call was meant to throw up the police off the scent, which is exactly what happens. And then he's like, I think when we find the explanation for the phone call, we will solve everything. And it's so true because why would they make this call? What's happening?
In my mind, there's a part at the inquest where Shepherd says, well, in a way, I'm the number one expert and authority on the method of the crime and timing of the death of Roger Ackroyd. And then Poirot spits out his tea.
We missed that. That was a deleted scene. Sorry, got us off track. No, that's great. And then we get into this interesting thing. Oh, because we had the fingerprints. Like, are there fingerprints on the knife? And Poirot warns Raglan. We have another misquote, which I think is really interesting. A lot of biblical references. This is another misquote, but I think it's intentional that he's misquoting it, and it's disarming. And this comes from, I am not an expert on the Bible, but Wikipedia sure is. It warns those who sin that both the quick and the dead will be judged by Jesus. And so whether you're alive or you're dead, Jesus knows.
It's a very Santa vibe there.
Yeah. And it turns out Poirot is Santa/Jesus. He's also watching. It's a warning. This is like a move that has many, many motives. He's warning Shepherd, and he's also like, check Mr. Ackroyd's fingerprints, you idiot. And Raglan is like, well, he can't have committed suicide. Are you Mrs. Ackroyd? And Poirot's like, no, let me explain it. The murderer wore gloves, wiped the blade, put Ackroyd's hand on the handle. And Raglan is like, why? Why would he do that? And he says, it's so simple. He's like, to make a confusing case more confusing. And in this case, too, I think that Shepherd benefits from chaos, but Agatha Christie also benefits from chaos and anything random. It's all there, again, to like give us 16 more chapters. Then Poirot asks for a little reunion of the family. It's very disarming. And so this is a big shift in the story. He really accuses everyone in this moment. And it's interesting, there's no staff here. So Poirot has like crossed the staff off the list. He's like, you are not suspects. First is like, Flora, tell me where Ralph is. And she's like, no. And he's like, Ralph is in trouble. And the more you stay silent, the more in trouble he is. And it really looks like he's guilty. And we get the same scene of Poirot asking a young, vulnerable woman to confide in him. He's like, trust Papa Poirot, who has much knowledge and experience and is not trying to entrap her. Flora doesn't take the bait, though. She's like, I don't know where he is. Then I love these descriptions. This is also harkening back to Halloween Party, where someone stares at Poirot in silence for like 4 minutes. Poirot gazes at Flora for a minute or two in silence, which, like, wow, that's a long time.
That's unnerving.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And everybody's sitting there in silence.
Right. It's not like they have their phones out, right?
No,
and they're like scrolling, and then Flora's just like, okay, old man. Everybody's just zoned in right there, focused in.
Yeah. And then Poirot has his outburst, and I love an outbursty, angry Poirot. And he kind of is admonishing. He is the Papa Poirot. He's like, I am your superior. He looks to everyone, each person, and he says, I beg of you to speak out. But Shepherd doesn't include himself. He just says to each in turn. He wasn't like, and then Poirot looked at me too, and it was scary. He's like spreading the glare away, but he's not lying either. Then Mrs. Ackroyd, she's uncomfortable, so she goes on this great whole thing about how it has to be Ralph. He was in World War I. He has shell shock. But then Flora's like, okay, stop it, mother. And she announces that she will announce her engagement to Ralph in the papers. She's like, Raymond, contact the news. I am engaged to Ralph. I support him. And she turns to Blunt and says she must stand by Ralph. And he nods. And she's like, I will not be disloyal to my friends. And Blunt is like, I'm going to stand by Flora too. In retrospect, it's this big self-sacrifice because she's in love with Blunt. So they both are like, we will sacrifice our happiness to stand by Ralph. Everybody is saying Ralph probably didn't do it. And Poirot brings this up later. He's like, people are pretty vehement that he's innocent. I'm kind of thinking he's innocent. Yeah, I think Poirot knows what's going on in that moment. And he's like, wow, okay. He says, Flora, you're very courageous and loyal. Please hold off on the announcement. And it's in Ralph's interest. He says, you put the case in my hands. You must not hamper me now. And we get this really interesting moment where he's like, this could be my last case. And I wonder if Agatha Christie is like, please stop making me write Poirot books. Again, this is the really passionate Poirot pleading with everyone. I think the subtext is, you all have so much drama. I don't really care about it. But if you come forward with all of the shit that you're hiding, it's going to make everyone's job really easy. He says, understand this, I mean to arrive at the truth. The truth, however ugly in itself, is always curious and beautiful to the seeker after it. I am much aged. My powers may not be what they were. Here, he clearly expected a contradiction. So he's like, I am so not what I used to be. Pause. And he's like waiting. That reminds me, my friend was telling me her son just went trick-or-treating and he's like a toddler. And he's figured out that people think he's really cute. And he's using it to his advantage. So what he would do when he was trick-or-treating is like, they would put like one piece of candy in his bag and he'd just wait there a beat and smile at them. And then they'd give him another one, which I love. This boy is super smart. And that's kind of what Poirot was doing, except the candy is a compliment. Nobody gives him a compliment, probably because he's been like staring at them for like 2 minutes. He says, in all probability, this is the last case I shall ever investigate, but Hercule Poirot does not end with failure. Monsieur and Madame, I tell you, I mean to know. That's emphasized. And I shall know, in spite of you all. He says, every one of you in the room is concealing something from me. Each of you has something to hide. I appeal to you all. Tell me the truth, the whole truth. And then he leaves. He just storms out. This is like his most dramatic, and I love it. And then he like is kind of muttering to himself, it's too bad, it's too bad. Like, ugh. What a scene. It's like a suspect bomb. And this is really where Poirot has already struck out on his own, but like he really does strike out on his own. And what we get in these next couple of chapters is different people coming forward and revealing these secrets. So we get a nice like structure that's broken a little bit by random things like an evening at Mahjong. pretty much there's this pattern of like, this person, this explanation, this person, that's why they're acting weird. Really, even in chapter 12, we're starting to kind of wind the story down, I feel like.
Definitely. And just Papa Poirot do preach. You know what I mean? It's just awesome when he goes off on these like aggressive sort of, I know you're all lying to me. Who do you think I am?
I know. He's so in love with the theatrical, and he has range. But like, he can disarm, but he can also terrify. And that's some of the power of Poirot.
Wow. Okay. So I guess we're going to pick it up next time with chapter 13, which is called The Goose Quill. Not to give anything away, people, but there it is.
There it is. Yeah. So we think about the goose quill, and in the next chapter, we start sitting in the kitchen, I think, of like Shepard and Caroline, and they're having a lovely little whiskey and hot chocolate. So I'd say bring that next time. Or your non-alcoholic equivalent, like a nice little spiced hot chocolate with some cinnamon. I don't know.
Oh, that's a great idea. Also, what's that tea that is more kind of like red in nature?
Oh, like the rooibos?
It's something, I can't remember what it's called. Oh, it's called Constant Comment. I think that's what it's called. I'm going to look this up now because now I have no choice. This is a great story that everyone's going to love because they're like, towards the end of the episode, we like it when Chad talks about beverages.
It's expected at this point.
Yes, it's Bigelow's Constant Comment tea. And when I was a kid, it was the first tea I had ever had. And it has a very unique taste to it. When you were talking about the spice, it felt like that to me. But then I never had it again. And then I was at a hotel last year and I just went down to the tea area. I was like, oh shit, forgot my pants. No, I'm just kidding. And so then I just grabbed a couple of tea bags. And as I was, I believe, prepping for a Poirot Pals episode, I made that tea, the Constant Comment, and everything came flooding back. Like my whole childhood. It was like, oh my God. So yeah.
Is it kind of like and this is a Pacific Northwest reference now, but as you are an honorary Pacific Northwesterner, is it like a market spice tea where it's that really thick?
No.
No?
I'm going to read from the website.
Okay, this is really important. This is the mystery we have to solve.
This is super important, people. And you always should be drinking Constant Comment tea. But here's the deal. Decades apart between servings. Constant Comment black tea, our secret recipe of orange rind and sweet spice. So Constant Comment tea, a recipe created by Bigelow tea founder Ruth Campbell Bigelow over 75 years ago.
Wait.
Just saying.
Okay. I think that we need to solve this mystery. And I think we need to have a side-by-side taste test because that sounds exactly like market spice tea. And I think we need to have both. And I think we need to have them in front of us. And we need to try each one and decide if they're the same or not.
This is perfect for our first episode of Tea Time with Caitlin and Chad. This is great.
Also only available on the dark web.
It's also a golf show.
Oh no, I thought we left golf behind.
Oh, so did I.
Okay, so do what you want. Have a beverage. Find one of these teas or not.
But by all means, do what you want. Absolutely do what you want.
But stay safe. And on that note.
Wow. All right.
Okay.
So I'm going to go put some cocaine on a goose quill. I'll
because we also have to see what that's about. We have to really learn through experience there.
Oh, I love this book. It's fantastic.
Okay. With that,
bye.